Hi, I'm Mike Hutjens, Extension Dairy Specialist at the University of Illinois. This module will look at individual cow grain feeding systems. Generally, there are about 3 different types of systems out there in the United States and in the world. The most common is the individual cow being fed in conventional barns. Usually in this system, the grain is fed separately. Example, barley and corn. The farmer then comes by and adds to that the protein supplement. Could be soybean meal, cottonseed, canola meal. He then may also add a mineral supplement mixture to that, top dress that as well, and or she may add additives and pre-mixes to that. Certainly another system is to go ahead and mix all these together and make it as a complete grain mixture and then feed that individually to the cow based on her age, level of production, growth requirements, and other criteria. So it's a one-on-one feeding system, and this farmer may feed these cows twice a day, once a day, or I've seen in Wisconsin some people feeding as much as 8 or 10 times a day to minimize the peaks and valleys and get nutrients to high-producing cows. A second system is to provide this grain to individual cows in a milking parlor. As they come in, these cows are fed based on a mechanical device that can be done either by hand or electronically that dispenses a certain amount of grain that has been pre-programmed or determined by the farmer. Yes, the old coffee can be used at times to add some extra grain as a top dress to that animal as well. The third, a system or approach would be top dressing an existing diet. The best example is top dressing a total mixed ration. This could be done, for example, with electronic grain feeder in a freestall operation, or it could be done in lockups when cows are locked up after they come back from the parlor and the farmer comes down and any cow giving a high level of production may get an extra 2 or 3 pounds of extra nutrients to try to maintain that production or to avoid metabolic disorders. Another way is to go ahead and add this grain on top of a TMR on the fly. So the farmer is trying to drop in a given amount of grain to a certain group of animals as his feed is going by. Or the fourth, another approach would be to add a close-up or fresh cow cocktail mix, which means there are unique additives and nutrients added in a certain mixture that is fed to very specific cows based on their stage of gestation or lactation. Let's look at guidelines on how much to feed. First of all, we recommend a maximum of 5 to 6 pounds of dry matter per meal. So if you're feeding 18 pounds of grain to your dairy cow, then you have to feed at least 3 times a day. Now that can be done by mixing some of this with the 4-H part of the diet, or it can be fed in 3 times a day, for example, in the milking parlor or in the stanchion barn. If we're going to feed individual grain, palatability is very critical. Here's one case: pelleting or processing can help because it reduces the dustiness or the fines. However, if you are not pelleting, adding fat such as tallow or soybean meal or soybeans could help that. Some farmers will add a little bit of water to the grinder to cut down on the dustiness and make the fines stick together. Also got to be aware that the cow is going to have a chance to smell and taste this feed directly to avoid unpalatable feeds. Examples of feeds that are less palatable would include fish, animal byproducts, and some fat sources. Another guideline is to try to balance the carbohydrate and protein fractions. For example, if I'm feeding haylage, lots of soluble protein, I would like to have in my grain mix some fairly fermentable carbohydrate. That'd be some finely ground corn or some sugar to balance it so the microbes can grow very aggressively and have a complete diet. But remember, I'm not going to be feeding grain 4 or 5 hours later. Therefore, I have to have some slow carbohydrate to match those proteins that break down a bit later in the feeding program. So it takes a bit of an art to get these fractions in balance to really let the microbes live and grow for 6, 8, 10 hours between various grain feedings. And another guideline is to attempt, if you're going to feed fairly high levels of grain at one time, to feed 2 or 3 pounds of foraged dry matter 30 minutes prior to the grain feeding. This will start setting up some saliva production, raise the pH in the rumen, and form a forage mat to slow down some of the fermentation rates. If we are going to feed grain in the parlor, be aware of some pluses and minuses. The good news: this may encourage cows to enter the parlor. They are rewarded. They know there is feed in there. They may walk in more aggressively. However, if they're not done eating when you are done milking the cow, she may be reluctant to leave the parlor, and that causes another problem. We have found that if you take grain out of the parlor, there is less defecating and fecal droppings in the parlor. Therefore, it's a cleaner environment to work in and also less material to hose down or move after you're done milking. We may require a crowd gate because if the cow is not enticed to come in the parlor, we want to take and move her forward because the grain incentive is not there. Then we'll find some farms who decided, we are going to take grain out of the parlor. We are going to have some real interesting days. As a guideline, 3 to 10 days to get these cows untrained or unlearned that there is no grain in the parlor and they will not be rewarded. Those could be some very trying days because that's lots of walking up and chasing cows into parlor to train them. We have discovered, however, that offering water may be an alternative. So the cow comes in, she's rewarded to allow her to drink fairly high levels of water. And if that has been tempered water because of the cooling process of the milk, could be another plus. Grain intake guidelines. Cows just don't wolf down grain. Remember, processed grains such as pellets or texturized grains can be consumed at a fairly high rate, 0.7 to 1 pound per minute. But remember, if the cows are only in the parlor for 5 minutes, that means you aren't going to get 8 or 9 pounds of grain into this cow. If we grind or have grist, this will be consumed at a lower rate because there is more fines, a little more dustiness. It tends to ball up in the cow's mouth. She has to spend more time. The eating rate's 0.4 to about 0.7 of a pound per minute. And finally, remember when the cow first comes in, research has indicated the first 4 minutes she'll eat much more or a faster rate, as defined as pounds per minute, compared to those cows that eat grain 8 or 10 or 12 minutes longer in the parlor at the end of their feeding period. So try to match intake to the amount of time spent in the parlor and grain particle size. This concludes our module on individual grain feeding systems. Thanks and have a good day.